And he's never been happier. Never been so fully engaged in a relationship with God as Father, Jesus as friend and mentor, and the Spirit as teacher and guide. Yes, I read all kinds of crazy stuff. The church people get uneasy because they are used to being told what they can read and what they can't. The church has a long and unfortunate history of doing this. But I'm free to decide for myself, and I can make up my own mind as to its value. Some of it crazy, but some of it breathtakingly profound. And yes, I have come to believe all kinds of weird ideas. The more I have considered the early followers of Jesus, the more I want to believe what they believed. It saddens me to think that embracing what they believed should be seen as weird. It worked for them, and I am finding that it works for me too. They believed, for example, that Jesus was the sent one, the one who made things right between God and his children. They believed in him as the great teacher and understood his simple teaching to get along with each other and have no enemies. They changed their minds about a lot of things and embraced the idea of God as their Father who loved them, not some angry deity that required blood and sacrifice. They believed that Jesus took away the sin of the world and took away their fear of death. And perhaps the most striking of all, they believed this applied to everyone, that God has no favourites. And they believed in the ultimate triumph of his divine love in all people coming into a relationship with the Father Creator. To many, both then and now, all these ideas seem not only weird, but just plain wrong. It's wrong, for example, that the sin of the world has been taken away. Reading the news would tell us that that isn't so. This is one of the questions I had grappled with. I was reluctant to accept that Jesus didn't accomplish what he was sent to accomplish. As it turns out, it all has to do with the definition of sin. If it is doing bad stuff, cheating, killing, lying, stealing, Jesus didn't take it away. If, however, sin is believing a lie about who we are, fearful little gods dodging the wrath of bigger gods, then Jesus took that away and replaced it with a new identity, one founded on love, not fear, one characterised by other focus, not self-focused, and one more akin to family, not tribes. But something happened. While the early followers, especially the women, understood their new identity and had it inform their remarkable countercultural lives, it did not last. Men rising up in authority and building a church structure, it killed it and replaced it with a whole set of ideas that people blindly accept because they are from the church fathers, as though that means God ordained. They are not. All it means is that men in authority structured things to suit their own agenda and used religion to control people, especially to control the women. There's probably a reason women took this good news and their new identity to heart much more readily than did the men. They outnumbered men significantly, and they took responsibility for living the teachings of Jesus seriously. Care for widows and discarded babies, the sick, demon-possessed, as well as their own children. They didn't need writings. It was a movement of practical action that increased even though so much was against them. Later, when they had questions like, how does atonement theory, even if we understood it, help us in our daily lives of caring for the widows and orphans? They were told to ask their husbands at home. Good luck with that one. Find me the man who could convince a very busy woman on a mission that the theory was of any practical value. These tireless social reformers and drivers of cultural change, they didn't get an answer to that question, and they probably wouldn't get one even today. I say women on a mission intentionally. The early ones were given specific instruction and revelation from Jesus himself after his crucifixion, something that upset the men big time, especially Peter. He thought Jesus would have followed the protocols of the time and relegate women to their place. He didn't. He gave Mary the most profound revelation of the ages, that he had risen from the dead, completely disregarding the fact that women's testimony counted for nothing in that society. He gave Mary much more than that good news. He told her things that were so outrageous that, had they been taken notice of, the entire course of Christianity would have been such that, as the Pharisees feared, the whole world will go after him. Peter was indignant and accused Mary of making stuff up. He had to be cautioned by his brother Andrew, who reminded Peter that they had all recognized Jesus had a special regard for Mary. Later, when the disciples were paralyzed by a fear that they too would be hunted down and killed, like their master, it was on record that she spoke reassurance and her words gave them courage to carry on. I know this because I read all kinds of crazy stuff written by people who've spent their entire lives making sense of writings that the church tried to destroy. I have a pile of books on my bedside table. Some I devour cover to cover, and some I read in small doses. Like this one. I picked it up the other night, opened it randomly, and came across this from fragments of text, probably as old as any we've had. It's part of several fragments about a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples. You know the part. Thomas asks, "We don't know where you are going. How can we know the way?" And Philip saying, "Just show us the Father and we'll be satisfied." Well, then Mary gives the final answer, quoting sayings like, "Seeking and finding the child of true humanity within you." Then in one fragment, a margin commentary is added. She uttered this as a woman who had understood completely. Isn't that amazing? I don't find that to be crazy. I'm not sure how much writing attributed to Mary is what she actually wrote, but the amount of material coming to light written about her, it's astounding. Instead, the Bible downplays her intellect and her role. Mary was seen to be a threat to the male authority, so they sullied her reputation. One pope even called her a prostitute, a slander that is still commonly believed. A church that destroyed writings as well as reputations in their quest to promote a male-only priesthood. The newfound equality for women that Jesus instituted was swept away as the churchmen dealt with what they saw as a threat to their authority. They were systematically sidelined, prevented from speaking in church, and even womanhood itself was saddled with the disgrace of bringing sin into the world originally. For centuries of church history, women's questions were never answered. They carried on as best they could. I once worked in a Catholic school, and I had the privilege of hearing about the courageous women from Ireland who were invited to start an order in Australia. They found the bishop's idea of their order was cooking and cleaning, so they up and left. On their way back to Ireland, the boat called into Melbourne, and these courageous women saw the plight of many girls who had been brought to the new colony virtually as slaves. the Sisters of Mercy quickly established schools and hospitals. I remember the Mother Superior speaking of the hardships they endured, trying to get the Church to support their attempts to deal with this social chaos. She quoted a line that I have never forgotten. "The spread of our convents, hospitals and schools was achieved in spite of the Church, not because of it." Curiously enough, their mission of healing and education was able to succeed in spite of the Church's attempts to shut them down, because of a quirk of history. You see, the founder of their order, Catherine Macaulay, was not a Catholic, and in passing over her fledgling order to the Catholic Church, she insisted that the sisters were accountable to the Pope, not the local bishops. So what did Jesus tell Mary that, had it been taken seriously, would have changed the course of history? I was hoping you would ask that question. But before I answer it, I want to talk about a similar hinge point in history that, had men in authority taken notice of the women's perspective, the course of history would be a different story, particularly in the prospect of people getting along instead of going to war. According to Jack Weatherford, in his remarkable book, 6 Indian nations formed what's called the Great League of Peace, and it served as a model for the framers of the US Constitution. Unfortunately, the framers considered but left out one crucial precept. The decision to go to war was made by the women. They had the most to lose, husbands, sons, fathers, and they only consented to war if the threat was dire enough. Turns out it rarely was, and their League of Peace was more than just a name. My point is, had this precept been included in the US Constitution, the entire course of history could have been very different. No civil war, no involvement in European conflict or the Pacific War, no Vietnam, Korea, Iraq or Afghanistan. I think we can be sure the women of the time would have seen each of these wars as unnecessary. Or as John Lennon has said, working class people around the world have no innate desire to go to war with each other. No innate desire to go to war. We have some remarkable examples of people groups choosing peace over war. The Quakers, for example, over the centuries they have proven to the world that it can be done. Or the Baha'i faith as another example of living out the idea of getting along instead of having conflict. 3 things stand out in both these examples. 1, they have a clear view of humanity and see themselves as part of a global family, not as a nation. Secondly, they each are committed to the idea of a priesthood of all believers, meaning they have no clergy or men in authority. And finally, they believe in the spirit within guiding people, and they can accommodate diversity of views rather than binding all the believers into a single creed. One characteristic that I find interesting in the Baha'i followers is the way they have viewed Mary of Magdala as the apostle to the apostles. They have taken to heart what Jesus said to her and have sought to understand it fully, and it has informed their unique life orientation. So what did Jesus tell Mary that, had it been taken seriously, it would have changed the course of history? I believe the single most influential idea is the one that I've grappled with for years. If Jesus took away the sin of the world, how come things have rocked along pretty much as before? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about sacrifice, the cross, the blood of Jesus taking away our sin, If we believe, we go to heaven. If we don't, we go to hell. All presented as the gospel or good news. For some it may be, for others it isn't. Peter must have been grappling with this idea too. For according to the gospel attributed to Mary, he asked Jesus, "What is the sin of the world?" Jesus replied, "There is no sin but our ability to deceive ourselves." He then explains it as a product of choices people make because they believe a lie about who they really are, acting in a way that resembles adultery, in that people are being unfaithful to their true spiritual identity, children of humanity. An identity not encumbered by sin, but one defined as acceptance by the Father into a family that has a single ethos to get along with each other. The more I read about the early followers of Jesus and how this radical change of mind about who God is and who they are influenced their everyday lives, the more I'm convinced it could have resulted, as the Pharisees recognised, the whole world going after him. Instead, sadly, what Jesus presented to Mary was not taken seriously by the men. The profound truth of it was dismissed as Gnostic. It's a handy way to discredit it. The term was applied to any mystical thought, that reflective, contemplative, meditative exploration of our inner selves, and such thinking had no traction with the Greco-Roman absolute thinking. It formulated the theories and the creeds. People came to rely on these external influences rather than the spirit within. In answering Peter's sin question, Jesus added a final commandment: "Do not lay down any rule beyond what I determined for you, nor promulgate law like the lawgiver, or else you might be dominated by it." I suggest we have become dominated by the law of sin. Sin and sacrifice had played a dominant part in the Jewish mind, and of course in Paul's education. Sin became the central idea by default. He seemed to have influenced the gospel writers to varying extent, and certainly the church fathers, ancient and modern ever since. It has been said, I read crazy stuff and believe weird ideas. Very likely by now you will agree. But losing the plot, I'm not so sure. I think I have found the plot. This male-female thing that Jesus broke down, men of the church have built it up again. The plot is not challenging the men in authority and not raising the prospect that the women had it right all along.